behind that curtain.
Greetings again with our traveling oral history microphone. This is Ray Mofield, and we're speaking from the room of Miss Georgia Brandon, one of the more celebrated citizens of Marshall County. And Miss Brandon, would you mind telling us how old you are?
Well, I'm not sure I know. Are you good in, I was born in 81, 90-something.
Well, I noticed in the printed history that it's September 30th, 1891.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the same year my father was born. And so that makes it a wonderful year to me.
I'm sure.
Now, you're one of the more celebrated people in Marshall County, having taught school here for a good long while. How long did you teach?
I taught, first year I taught at Birmingham, Kentucky, which is now underwater.
Uh-huh.
Then the next 3 years, I taught at Franklin School in Paducah. Then the next year, I went to Evansville and stayed 1 year and taught in the old Centennial School, they call it. It's 100 years old, and it looked it. Then I came back to Benton, and since then I've stayed there in Benton. That's quite a...
So you had a very fine and long-lasting career.
Yes,
in
I
teaching.
did, and I enjoyed. You know, I'd enjoy it, or I wouldn't have stuck with it that long, and they wouldn't have had me that long if I hadn't showed some interest in it.
That's right. Well, we've heard many compliments about you over the years, and I know you taught so many of the present generation in Marshall County that you could get a good word spoken for you just about anywhere I know.
Well, it just delights me to think that people remember me.
Yes.
I don't always, I always feel like I've been forgotten, you know, and that's not the case, I'm sure, but then I have that feeling that that I'm not as well known as I think I ought to be.
Well, that's one reason we're doing the oral history tape, is so that people will hear about you and they won't forget you. I'm sure they haven't anyway.
Well, that's mighty nice of you to do that.
The recently printed history of Marshall County had a beautiful write-up about you. Now, your father was?
J.F. Brandon, Joseph Franklin.
And your mother?
Susan Angeline Brown.
So
My father's people came here from Virginia. There were two brothers who started out, didn't know where they were going. And they were from Virginia. They came down this way, and when they got to a certain part of Kentucky, they decided they'd separate. One went north, and one came down here. So we're a divided family. I've got relatives everywhere, I guess, that I don't know anything about, because just distant relatives, you know.
I don't know if any of them went to Callaway County or not, but I remember a Brandon's Mill, a famous water mill where they made meal on Blood River. And I have been to that mill, and it made wonderful meal. Everyone wanted it as long as it stayed in operation. Of course, after TVA built Kentucky Dam, it made a lake out of that, and it would no longer supply meal anymore.
Uh-huh.
Now, I don't know whether those Brandons were related to your
Well,
Brandons.
they had to be, because those two brothers were alone when they came, and one went south and one went north. And this must be the same family, though it's very distant now, of course.
One of the most celebrated old car museums in the country is owned by a fellow named Howard Brandon at Murray. He now has opened a branch in Nashville, Tennessee, and he has 125 different old cars, plus a number of other old-time things like phonographs and airplanes and
Uh-huh.
so forth.
He goes in for the old times.
He does. He loves the old-time things. Now, were you born in Marshall County?
A mile and a half south of Benton. On what's now, I don't know who lives there now, but it was the Hyatt farm for a long time after my father left there.
Mm-hmm.
He had a brother, and did you ever hear of George Brandon?
Yes.
Well, he was his brother,
Mm-hmm.
and he had two daughters. They went to California and stayed out there a while. Then when they came home, they stopped there at Duke and lived there the rest of the time. But they were just as close to us as they could be.
Mm-hmm. The Hyatt farm, my mother-in-law, Ruth Hyatt Blumenberg, I think she was from that immediate area.
Uh-huh.
Her father might have been involved in that.
He might have been.
And I believe I've heard her say that at least part of his old farm is now owned by Hattler Morgan.
Yes,
And
that's true too. You
So-
see, Hattler married Uncle Oscar's daughter.
Virginia.
Uh-huh, Virginia. And Virginia's passed already.
Yes. And of course, there's Billy Brandon Morgan, who gets his middle name from
Brandon has a lot of names for these.
Yeah.
I mean, the names carried with every branch of the family has been very proud of the Brandon name, and they've named their child.
Did you go to school in Benton, in grade school, or
Oh,
did you go to Church Grove, or?
I went to Benton. We lived in Benton, right up there on the bank of Marshall County a lot.
Mhm.
Not always, either down under the hill.
Mhm.
That's where we lived first. And then when we moved up on the hill, we were on the bank of Marshall County's property.
Do you remember any of the teachers that you had?
Well, sometimes I can think of them, and sometimes I can't. I know who my first grade teacher was, and you may have heard of her, Blanche Barry, old Judge Barry's daughter.
Yes, sir.
You've heard of her?
I've heard that name before.
Uh-huh.
Someone's mentioned
Well,
it.
she was my first grade teacher, and then Jane Holland lived out near Fair Dealing, was it?
Yes, I
the
think
Hollands.
so.
Well, that's where, by the time I reached third grade, she was a teacher. And didn't take long to cover a grade then, but I had one little girl one time that I couldn't teach. She distressed me. I didn't think she knew anything. And so finally then we just kept children till they learned something, not so many years, but till they learned something. And I kept keeping her. And she said, well, I'm going to promote Miss Georgia next time. I said, well, she had more sense than I thought she did.
Yes. Well, you and Margaret Heath are the people that I always think about when I think of Benton school teachers that were famous. And Miss Margaret had quite a reputation. Of course.
Margaret has had a good, and she's been a wonderful woman too, but she wouldn't want to be put in my class by any means.
Well, I
Because
think
she's younger than I am. That's what I mean.
well, I realize what you're saying there, but in another sense, I'm sure she may have even modeled her career on yours.
Well, we've had that in common.
Now, you finished elementary school, and in those days, could you begin teaching after you had finished elementary if you passed an exam?
Yes, that was it. Had to pass a county examination, and I never had to take one of those. I don't believe I could ever passed one.
Well, I'm sure you could
But
have.
I didn't. I was fortunate enough to always have a job coming when the one ended.
Hmm.
And so that makes it nice for one.
Now, as I read the history of you in the Marshall County History recently published, that after you had rambled around and taught in Evansville and various other places, that you came back to Benton and taught 40 years there.
Well, I hadn't thought lately how long it was, but I'd stayed there the rest of the time. You know, I was always sort of a home girl, but I decided that my mother needed me and that I could teach at home just as well as I could there. And I had friends on the school board. Marvin Ward, do you remember anything about him? I don't. Yes, you do.
I don't
But
know.
he was insistent on my coming. The board, some of them didn't want to because of prejudice, and they didn't want me. And Marvin just insisted, and I always loved Marvin for that because he really didn't have any children to
Hmm.
send to school, but he realized that it would be a good thing for the school and for me to be there.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
Oh yes, I guess I did. I was. They always called me the fifth wheel. You know what that is on a wagon, don't you?
Yeah.
No, no good.
Well, that must have been said in jest.
Well, my mother did it. She didn't mean it.
Why,
But
no.
I remember what she told me about it, and she said, Granny said, Annie, you ought not to do that. That child may be your main support someday. And I thought I've treasured that.
Uh-huh. Now, did you have a brother that was
A missionary.
noted as a missionary?
Yes,
Yeah.
Joe,
Mhm.
he had father's name, Joseph Franklin. They called him Little Joe.
Did he go to Brazil?
Sure, went to Brazil more than once. He'd go and he'd come back on a furlough and go back again. But he really was a missionary. He wanted to preach and he wanted to travel, so he took it out that way.
Mhm. Well, I've heard of him quite a number of times, and as I said, a rather noted individual in the missionary field. I suppose that was relatively rare to go to Brazil in those days.
Well, it was. I remember the first missionary I ever heard was from Brazil, and his name was, what was his name? I can't think right now. Look how it's snowing.
Oh, it's really coming down, isn't it?
It is when I can see it. Why, it's really coming down.
Well, did you ever get to travel very much after you?
No, that's what I wanted to do, really. I just would love to have gone all over the world time after time, but I never traveled too much. I went to, well, I don't know where I've been now.
Well, since your brother was a missionary, I presume that religion played an important part in your life.
Yes, it did. I'm a Baptist, and I was saved when I was a little girl, not too little, but young.
Could you tell us anything about what the churches were like and who some of the preachers were in Benton when you were younger?
Well, I might be able to. They were different to what they are now. You know that.
In many cases, the country churches, even when I was a young boy, they only had preaching about once a month. Was that true in the city churches?
Yes, there were 3 churches when I was the first remember, the Methodist and the Christian. They called them Campbellites, saying they didn't resent it.
Mm-hmm.
And Baptist,
Mm-hmm.
and they took Sunday about. Our church had the first and third Sundays, and the Methodists had the second and fourth, and I don't know the others to filled in somewhere.
Mm-hmm. And they would, one preacher would go around and serve several different congregations, I suppose.
Yes, that's true in a sense, but mostly we had our own pastor.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there were times when we didn't. But
Did you ever go out in the country and visit when they had a brush arbor meeting?
well, not exactly that, but I've been in a smaller town where they had just anybody they could get to preach for them,
Mm-hmm.
and that's about the same as a brush arbor.
Well, all right, I guess so. At your age, you probably, you've seen Benton change a lot and develop a great deal. Do you remember what it looked like around the court square in the early days, or what some
Oh
of the
yes, I
businesses
surely
were?
do. The horses were hitched up to the court square. They had an iron fence and a chain
Around the court house.
around the court square,
Mm-hmm.
and they
So when the farmers came to town, they had a place to tie their horse and then go into the stores and
oh yes.
trade around here and there.
Just think about tying a horse up there around the court square. Wouldn't that be something?
It would. It would cause a great deal of excitement today, wouldn't it? I can remember, of course, I didn't come to Benton very much, living near Hardin. That seemed like a long ways off.
It was.
But we always came at least twice a year, and that was Tater Day and Big Singing Day.
Sure.
And of course, tied their horses around the court square back then. What were some of the stores? Do you remember any of the merchants?
Yes, I do. McElrath, Pat McElrath had a store there, and Mr. Barnes, Bert Barnes. Do you remember him? Did you ever
No,
hear of him?
don't believe
Well,
it.
he kept the store for a long time, and then I don't know who was the next one there. McElrath, and I can't think right now.
I can remember that when I was small, there was I'm not sure I can remember the full name, but it had Heath in it, and that was Margaret's father, I think. Morgan and Heath, was
Margaret and Heath,
that? I believe.
and Headley was her father.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but now that wasn't too far back, Margaret and Heath.
Well,
was it?
maybe not. It was, I can't remember
Well,
back much farther than, say, 1929 or 30 or along there somewhere.
I went to Benton in 1922 from my other teaching points,
Mhm.
and I stayed at Benton then till I quit teaching in 1960. I believe I retired in 1960.
Mhm. Did you have to teach more than one grade when you started teaching here, or?
Over at Birmingham, I taught 4 grades. And I remember one of the boys came out with a handful of biscuits that high. He said, "Miss Georgia, I'm going out to starve."
Well, now, Mark Clayton tells me that Birmingham was quite a city in its day, that the showboat came there.
Yes, I've been there when the showboat came in, and they had the prettiest music ever was. Did he tell you that?
Well, I believe he did say that they had music.
Oh, they had music on the showboat, and everybody, they could hear them coming.
Mhm.
When they'd hear the showboat coming, everybody rushed to the river to get a good look at it.
They'd play this steam calliope, I guess, and you could hear that
That was it. Uh-huh.
a long, long ways. And I believe he told me that people from Benton would drive over their horses and buggies and attend the show.
Uh-huh. They did, and the first year I taught over there, I drove back and forth once a week. I stayed at home. I mean, I had to go home to see my mother every week, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then one Sunday afternoon, it looked like it was going to rain and bad weather, and my brother took me over there, drove the horse and buggy, and he just whipped that old horse till he made the trip in an hour, and that was fast driving in that time. You know, go 12 miles. It's 12 miles.
Yes, that is. That's moving right along for a horse and buggy. Did you do much train travel out of Benton back when they had passenger service?
No, no, I didn't. I remember the first trip I ever took to Paducah was at night. They had an 8 o'clock train in the morning, and came back from Hollow Rock Junction at night.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I ever went to Paducah, I traveled on that train. I thought I was somebody going somewhere.
Yeah. Well, you certainly were. Did you ever fly in an airplane?
It's about 30 minutes, and it's the best fun I ever had. I went from some point in Missouri to Tulsa, just 30 minutes drive in the air.
Mm-hmm. It is real pleasant, isn't it?
It is. It's so nice. I'd like to go somewhere else sometime when it could fly longer. But I don't guess I'll ever get to go many more trips. I'm not planning on many more.
Do you remember any of the city officials or county officials in the earlier days the judge or the sheriff or the mayors?
Judge Reed is the first one that I remember. William Reed went to Paducah from there.
Uh-huh.
You've heard of him?
Yes, I have. I've heard of William Reed. And did you have to serve as sort of a nursemaid to your children? You taught in the grades. Did you have to button up their overcoats and?
Oh yes, I had that to do. Not always. Some children their mothers know how to get them ready to go to school, and they teach them a little bit. But I had some of that to do, where they hadn't taught them. I had to take over. It had to be done.
Mm-hmm. What about some of the old medical customs of the day? Were the doctors that came, did they prescribe catnip tea or?
Well, I don't remember. I know about catnip, but I don't remember it's been prescribed. I know one time I had a lot of toothache. I guess they didn't take care of my teeth like they should have, not knowing any better. But my teeth ached, and I had them. Doctor would come and pull my teeth when they had a toothache. That's the only remedy for it. And we were playing in the yard one Sunday. I think it was Sunday. Anyhow, they saw the doctor coming, and all the children just hooped and hurrahed and ran away. And there I was caught. I was the victim. And so I had to stay there till I took the medicine, which was pulling of tooth.
Yeah. Well, do you remember any kind of a funny story that you might tell us? Now, I'll give you an example. One of the funniest stories that I've collected, it seemed to me, was Miss Layla Ely. She taught my daughter piano for a number of years and did that for quite a while, and she'd have a concert in the spring. Well, she told me that Hatler's daughter, one of the daughters, was giving a spring recital, and Philip Morgan was a little baby. So Hatler brought him, and the concert ran on and on and on and on over to Methodist Church for quite a lengthy period. Finally, Hatler got tired, and he pinched Philip and made him cry so he could take him out.
Oh, that is good. I never would have told that on myself, would you?
Well, Hatler, I asked Hatler about it later, and he said, well, that's right. He said, I wouldn't have told it, but Layla Ely told it. So, but one other real funny story to me that I've collected in interviewing, and this was a lady by the name of Leigh Story at Scale. And I asked her if she knew any funny stories. She said, well, I think the way my husband proposed was unusual. Said, he took me down to the Story graveyard and said, would you like to be buried here? So that was an unusual story.
Yes, an unusual way of approaching.
That's right. Well, we don't have a whole lot more time. I thought maybe there was something you'd like to get on before we...
Well, I wish I knew something real interesting. One of the funniest things that happened in our family, I had a sister who had a long spell of sickness, and she had to have the doctor. Dr. Hall was the doctor. You heard of old Dr. Hall, haven't you?
I've heard of him, yes, ma'am.
Well, he was the doctor, and we children were out running and romping in the yard, playing, and we knew the doctor was coming, and we saw him coming, and all the children ran but me, and I was the one he was coming to see that time, to have my tooth pulled, and that hurt my feelings so bad I could hardly live over that. To think they would run off and leave me there just to meet the doctor by myself, and then have my tooth pulled to boot.
And not a soul stood by you.
Not
they could have held your hand or
well,
something.
they could have stayed there and helped a little. I know there's something they could have done. I still feel that way.
Well, I certainly thank you, Miss Georgia Brandon.
Well, honey, I'm sorry I'm not more knowledgeable of everything, because you could make a real good story of things that if I just had my wits about me, I might tell you more, but I guess that's about...
You've done exceptionally well, and we're real pleased that you permitted us to come, and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and remind our listeners that this program is heard every Monday morning at 8:30. It's made possible by Shelby McCallum and WCBL Radio, and a copy of this tape will be placed for library purposes in the Benton Library, along with all the others that we make for the program over the years. This is Ray Mofield speaking. We return you now to our studios.